Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have you here today. We've pulled together a special briefing this afternoon with 2Ans and KPMG on some of the issues that have been going around cybersecurity, particularly the last couple of weeks with the DDoS attacks. If you haven't met me before, my name is Craig Young. I am the CEO of 2Ans, the Technology Users Association of New Zealand, and we've done quite a few things with KPMG over the years, and it's my privilege to ask Philip to make a few comments to open the session.
Great, thanks, Craig. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar as well. It's been interesting. You know, the number one conversation certainly that I've had, whether it be boards, CISOs, chief operating officers, number one question over the last 3 or 4 weeks is, what is happening? Are we at risk? Is it going to happen to us? And what do we do about it? And I'm sure Michael and Hillary have had very similar conversations. And hopefully those conversations are still happening, because even today I was dealing with an organization who is still being impacted by the same denial of service attacks, the DDoS attacks that we're going to talk about. So it hasn't gone away, even though it's dropped out of the headlines a bit, it is still very here. So look, I'll hand you back to Craig, but thank you everyone for coming today. And certainly for some of your colleagues haven't had a chance to join us, it is being recorded and we can pass the link on afterwards. So we've had a few requests.
Great, thanks, Philip. So the way we're going to run this afternoon's panel session is we're going to start by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves, give them a little bit of background so you know their area of speciality, their expertise. A few minutes on just their thoughts on current state of play, maybe some initial thoughts around what's been happening, perhaps they've got some stats they can share. And as they discuss, as they go, I'm really keen for people to put Q&As in. There is, if you've used Zoom before, there's the Q&A button at the bottom that you can then type your questions in, and I'll keep an eye on those. I'm going to ask people to speak in this order. So Philip will go first. He's a partner at KPMG. Hillary, who's the CISO at Cordia. And then Michael Shearer, who is the Principal Advisor, Threats and Vulnerability, I had to practice that, at CERT. So I'm going to hand over to Philip to get underway, and he can, and we will go Philip, Hillary, Michael.
Thanks, Craig. As Craig said, I'm a partner here at KPMG, and I'm part of our cybersecurity services practice. Essentially, we help organizations manage their security risks, whether that's responding to an incident, which has certainly been the last 3 weeks, or potential incident, designing security systems, giving assurance. And it's something I've focused on for the last 25 years. I changed my career dramatically and loved it ever since. And certainly myself and the team, we operate everywhere from the governance level, so helping boards understand security and how it impacts the organizations, down to operating at a very detailed technical level as well. And it's really good to see so many people attending this afternoon. Because I hope that these DDoS attacks, these distributed denial of service attacks, have been a bit of a wake-up call. I am hoping, because certainly we've had other events in the past, and it'd be fair to say that it's got our attention briefly, and then we've moved on. Because unfortunately, you know, and why I say I hope it's a bit of a wake-up call, unfortunately in New Zealand, we still have a very, I call it she'll be right sort of attitude, which is fantastic, and it's a fantastic bit of our culture. But it doesn't always work in a security instance. You know, she'll be right works when you're talking to the guy down the road that you've known, and the handshake works, and you can trust them to do the right thing. Or if something goes wrong, you know, you can find out who that person is. You know, it works. But life's moved on, and I don't think we have. Now, if I look at the other countries, as some of us, the other developed countries, we are probably the least mature in terms of our defenses for cybersecurity, or our ability to respond to a cyber attack. So certainly we do a survey to chief executives each year of KPMG, a global survey, and look at New Zealand results from last time we did that. We were the least prepared country for a cyber attack. You know, certainly some people thought they were well prepared and were quite well prepared, but of all the countries surveyed, and there were many, it was a global one, we were the least prepared. If I pick a typical maturity scale, you know, 0 to 5, whereas, you know, 1, we do things occasionally, and 2 is we sort of do it, but it's not formalized, it's not structured, and 3, got some good structured processes in place. on that 0 to 5 scale, on average, New Zealand organisations are sitting about 1.9 in terms of the maturity for cybersecurity, which isn't a positive thing to say. And we're getting better, but slowly. Unfortunately, with the threats rapidly increasing, we are becoming an increasing common target. And it would be common to see headlines about New Zealand organisations these days, not about organisations we don't know about. So as I said, I hope this is a bit of a wake-up call. The fact that you've all joined says you're interested, which is great, because we could see real world this time what the impact of a relatively straightforward cyber attack is on businesses, and not just the businesses that were targeted, but the businesses that were operating with those as well. So good to see you. Thank you very much.
Great, I'll pick up next then. Thanks so much, Philip. I'm Hilary Walton. Nice to meet you. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the Kordia Group. So the Kordia Group operate a network that spans the length of New Zealand, from Kotaia to Invercargill and the Chatham Islands as well. We also operate a comms network that spans almost 3/4 of the world's oceans. We broadcast TV and radio for New Zealand, and we're the only New Zealand telco that's solely dedicated to businesses. We also have Aura Information Security as one of our divisions, so cyber security is one of our pedigrees. My personal background though is I'm an organisational psychologist, and I also have a background in security and risk management. And I had the honour and the pleasure of working over in the UK for the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure, which is sort of the forward-facing arm of MI5, working on a security culture project. And then also I led information security for the 2012 London Olympic Games. So my quick take then on kind of what I'm seeing and what's going on is I agree with Philip. There's just been a real deluge of cyber attacks that we've seen as 2020 ticked over in January and throughout. It started with Travelex, and then we had Toll Group and Lion Breweries and Fisher & Paykel Appliances, and we saw property management firms and police and Fonterra, and it's going on and on and on. The impact on organisations is real. So for example, Travelex, they had a 36% drop in revenue. We're seeing businesses that are having the systems pulled down and they're reverting to manual processes. And then obviously brand and reputational damage from information that's been exposed. So you'll note I'm not just talking about DDoS attacks here. My key insight is that I want organisations to take away that all cyber attacks and all security events are really important. So this includes DDoS, which we're going to discuss in a bit more detail today, but organisations need to make some really pragmatic decisions about what their top security risks are and put their money in the right place and mitigate those accordingly. And each business is different. It's going to vary from organisation to organisation. So for example, if we sort of come back to the DDoS kind of sort of environment that we're in, then if you're an organisation that has a large part of your business that you're transacting through a website, then you're at greater risk of a DDoS attack compared to, for example, an organisation that might have just some kind of brochureware, some kind of advertising of their business on their website. So businesses need to kind of take that into consideration when they're looking at mitigating all of their top security risks on their risk register. But very similar to Phil, I do think this whole year has been a bit of a wake-up call for organisations. There was ransomware that came through as everyone was working from home, and now it's DDoS. Security events and cyber attacks aren't going away, so we do need to pick up our game as organisations, make it a top business focus, because I'm a firm believer that you can't be safe as an organisation if you're not being secure. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks a lot. So yeah, my name is Michael Shearer, and let's see if I can get my job title right here. I am the Principal Advisor, Threats and Vulnerabilities here at CERT New Zealand. So briefly about CERT, if you don't know who we are a government agency. We're a part of MB, and we exist to help all New Zealanders with cybersecurity incidents, whether you've been affected or you think you've been affected. If you report that to us, then we can help you work through that. We also provide advice to all New Zealanders about how to protect and prevent cybersecurity incidents. So that's why this kind of a session is really important to us. My background is I've spent, I think, over 15 years now, primarily doing systems and system security. And then, so I've been here at CERT since the beginning, so it's 4 years now for me. And I've just recently started my new role of Principal Advisor Threats and Vulnerabilities. So stepping back from systems and looking wider at what are the threats that are facing New Zealand, where are our vulnerabilities, and what can we as CERT do to help protect New Zealand. I guess I can't speak specifically about DDoS or other specific incidents, but in general, really what we're seeing is the increase of financially motivated crime. So historically, in the InfoSec community, people have gotten really excited about advanced persistent threats, which, that's a real thing, but most people aren't really targeted by that. But the financially motivated crime groups that have really grown over the last few years, year on year, we see more and more, and we see increasingly sophisticated attacks. So they are doing things that perhaps a few years ago you would have associated with an APT group that are now actually commoditized, that these groups are carrying out these attacks, and in partnership models, you'll have one group will perhaps compromise a network and then just sell that access off to another crime group who will then deploy malware or steal the information and hold that for ransom or whatever it is. It's a lot of loosely organized crime groups, and that's really what it is. It is crime, and they're pretty well organized. They're pretty good at what they do, a lot of them. And yeah, they are evolving. They will do the things that get them paid, and if something isn't getting them paid, they'll stop doing that and they'll move on and develop some new way of trying to make money, because that's really what it's all about. In terms of what we really see New Zealanders needing to do, looking at businesses, is really, I think, to realize that security is not a product and it's not a state of being. You can't download a piece of software, install it, and say, now we're secure. It's an ongoing process. You have to work with your security team, if you've got a security team, or with a security partner who can help you understand where you are, what the risks that your business faces are, and how you're going to move forward to protect yourself against those, and keep moving forward and keep evolving your defenses, because we do see the attackers keep evolving. Our defenses have to keep evolving along with that. And yeah, I think back to you, Craig.
Oh, kia ora, Michael. Thank you very much. We've got some really interesting questions coming in. I've turned on the option where people can see the questions, and you can also vote questions up. Because we have a lot of people, if you see a question that you think is worth asking and that you would have asked, instead of writing it in again, you can simply use the up thumb and it'll go to the top, and I can see people are already doing that. I'm going to start with asking Hillary. I think we'll go to Hillary first. I'm going to pick on you. Because one of the questions that came in is one that we were thinking about was, what are the DDoS attacks? What is it? Particularly the ones we've been seeing in the media in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So thanks for someone for asking that. Okay, so DDoS attack, that's the acronym for it, which is DDoS. It stands for Distributed Denial of Service Attack. So it's a malicious attempt to try and disrupt normal traffic on, for example, a server or a service or a network by completely overwhelming it with a flood of internet traffic. So it's achieved by utilising multiple compromised computers as sources of the attack, and they vet these systems. They're usually computers and servers, and they basically use those to launch this attack. So often the owners of these machines are completely unaware that their systems are being used to launch these types of attack. So I guess it's a bit like, if you think of if someone directed thousands of cars down Auckland Southern Motorway at rush hour, creating like a really monster traffic jam that clogs up the highway, and it prevents regular traffic from arriving at that desired destination. So these attacks can take down your website, or they can take down your internet-facing infrastructure and cause serious disruptions and compromising your ability to just keep going with your business as usual activity. So your regular customers, for example, your legitimate web traffic may not be able to access your site or your systems, and it can be extremely frustrating. So the other part of that is that they also then, before they launch these attacks, they normally send you a ransom note. So in the ransom note, it's usually sent to an executive as well, because they want it to actually hit the right person, but they demand payment of Bitcoin, and then along with threats of more significant DDoS attacks, you know, if the ransom is not paid. So the campaign that has been going on in New Zealand has been targeting quite a few New Zealand and Australian entities, predominantly in the financial sector. But in addition, businesses which sort of transact quite a lot on websites in particular, so that kind of retail, is going to be, you know, quite an obvious target, because they're looking to just, because that would be the right kind of disruptive effect that they're after.
Hilary, there's a question that's come up. We're just following on from that because you talked about the ransom as a very simple one. Should organisations pay the ransom when affected by a DDoS attack? Yeah, there's lots of nodding heads. No. We might have to ask Michael as well.
No, absolutely not, because even if you pay, there's no promise that you'll actually get your systems back. And that this is kind of hard for New Zealanders, I think, in particular, because as Philip mentioned, we're kind of trusting by nature, and all organisations or businesses might want is just to get back on track and get back into their business. So it's very tempting to pay that ransom demand to do that, but there's no promise that they'll actually give you that system back. And then also they might hit you again because they know you paid once and you'll pay again. So the advice there is resounding no.
And Michael, you were nodding your head as well. Did you want to add in on that one?
I think shaking my head with a no there. Yeah, so our advice is always not to pay ransoms, whether that's a DDoS ransom or a ransomware or whatever it is. There was an interesting report, which I would have to try and dig out, that basically showed that for ransomware incidents, it was about double the cost to recover those businesses that paid the ransom versus those that didn't. It was actually cheaper to just restore from their own backups where those existed, because in the end, the effort of restoring their systems from backup, whether that was from their own backups or from the decrypted backups, was actually about the same. So the cost was actually higher. The other aspects, of course, are that these are criminal groups. So, you know, you unfortunately would be, you know, paying criminals to hopefully go away. And also, in some cases, you know, these groups are claiming to be from certain nation states. Whether they are or aren't, I can't possibly say. But, you know, there are also sometimes sanctions against countries that you may need to consider legal advice about whether you pay that ransom or not.
Yeah, look, I promised to ask Philip the question about the cyber maturity, but I want to stick on this DDoS current situation. So, Michael, we'll just stick with you for a minute. There's a couple of questions here, but one that I thought we might just capture. Why do you think New Zealand businesses are actually faced with this wave of attack at the moment? So
I think that here in New Zealand, it's not that we're being targeted. You know, often we think about New Zealand being tucked away down in the corner of the world and we're far away from everyone. But of course, on the internet, that's not true. We're all next door neighbours. And so part of my job is I'm talking regularly, basically every day, with other international certs around the world. And really what we see here in New Zealand is reflected in other Western countries. You know, it's not that New Zealand's being targeted. We're just seeing the same sorts of large-scale financially motivated crime that is affecting other people on the internet. So yeah, I think it's a case of we'll kind of continue to see the things that are getting the criminals paid, and yeah. Philip,
do you want to?
I'm just going to add, this campaign, for want of a better term, has been really happening since October last year. So it's actually nothing new. It's our turn. So CERT, so Michael and his colleagues sent out a warning, published it 1 November last year, saying this is happening. It's particularly targeting financial institutions. I think for a lot of us, that insights we weren't aware of it. So yeah, this has been targeting other parts of the world. Australia and New Zealand have been seeing it, particularly since early August. So it is nothing new. In fact, probably since the beginning of early 2018, we started to see globally distributed denial of service attacks ramp up considerably. But what did happen in the middle of last year, middle of last year, was FBI took down a significant number of denial of service sites where you could basically rent the capability, pay $60 and point at your favorite target. So they moved in, that was mid-2018. They moved in, took out the 12 biggest websites where you could rent the capability. No attack needed. And that significantly dropped the volume we're seeing globally. But then it started to ramp up again and again because it works, because people do pay the ransom. So it's about return on investment. And certainly you're right, we're not being targeted this time. It's just kind of our turn. If you look at sort of wider ransomware and that, often we are getting targeted because we're a bit of a easy target, a soft target. It works, and they make money from it. And will that continue to happen? I don't know, because A, you shouldn't pay the ransom, but secondly, the amount they're demanding is going up. So, you know, the amounts being demanded this time, distributed denial of service tax, will sort of range between $150,000 and $300,000. And if you don't pay by this date, they start to go up, but maybe $100,000, $150,000 a day until you pay. It's all very well when ransoms were $1,000, you know, ransomware was $1,000, but those money demand is going up and up and up. So, you know, even if you had this mild inkling you should pay, the capability, it's just not worth it.
Where do you think these, I'll stick with you, Philip, where do you think these are coming from, these attacks? I mean, there are some questions here about whether it's coming from a state-based nexus or, you know, rather than just criminals. What's your thought on that?
It's a good question. And look, it's hard to know because, and Hillary talked about it before, they're using compromised computers. So maybe they're using 10,000 computers where they put malware on people's computers and they're controlling them to bombard organizations. So how far back goes, I don't know. Certainly what they're emulating is something that a couple of criminal groups, certainly one linked originally to Russia, were doing some time ago. But, you know, what I guess people are surmising at the moment is actually they're emulating those. So I've seen 14 different names that this group or this person have pretended to be in their ransom notes. Now, they start off saying that we're a criminal group called Fancy Bear. Now, Fancy Bear never called itself Fancy Bear. It was just a name that a certain intelligence organization put to that group to identify them. But that name keeps changing, and that's really on the basis that, okay, it says it's from Fancy Bear or Cozy Bear or Silence, Lazarus. You Google that, and all these scary things come up. You go, okay, it's real. I better do it. They're serious. Whether it is any of them, who knows? You know, it is probably not somebody sitting in the garage in Glenfield. It is, and it's probably not an individual. Just the scale it's happening over a number of months. It is probably more likely an organised crime group of some kind, potentially a nation state. Now, you've certainly seen nation states use ransomware and similar ransom in the past. North Korea, yeah, how do they make money? Ransomware and paying in bitcoins helps. It may be another nation state to get a bit of attention, but, you know, normally they're not as obvious about it, or normally doesn't go on as long in sort of this country and this country and this country. Don't know. Certainly there are multiple intelligence agencies focusing on this now. As I said before, had FBI take down services in the past. Hopefully we'll get to that. At the moment they're moving on, but it is still happening in New Zealand right now, the same group. So I guess the answer is we don't know. It's probably not who they say they are, because I've said there's so many different sorts of people. but yeah, it's hard to tell who's behind it. And it could well be that someone set up this botnet, so infected all these tens of thousands of computers, and they're just renting it out. And it could be someone who just wants to get a bit of a revenge, make a bit of a money.
Yeah.
Hard to know.
Yep. Hilary, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I did. Often what we can find as well is that these DDoS, denial of service attacks, they can actually be just a distraction method as well. So they DDoS you, and while there's this ensuing chaos as you can't get to your systems or your website and you're trying to kind of get that go, they then slip in through like a backdoor or vulnerability, and then the actual main goal might have been to take information or data from your network or cause more disruption actually inside your network. So that kind of shouldn't be lost sight of as well. Sometimes they're just a distraction technique for another kind of event which is happening on your network.
How do you see in your role, do you see these cyber attacks evolving at the moment, or are we getting similar ones all the time?
It's interesting, isn't it? Like these DDoS attacks, they've been around for tens of years. And yes, there are some sophisticated groups doing them, but there's also some really unsophisticated groups, like gamers often DDoS each other. If they get frustrated that someone else is winning in a game, they'll DDoS to take away the performance of that person's game, which is kind of interesting. But the two of the main kind of things I'm seeing, with that aside, is that as Philip mentioned, there's more of this as a service offerings that cyber criminals are using. So ransomware as a service, you know, all of these things which just make it so easy for cyber criminals to do what they need to do without being sort of super technical. So there's kind of that piece. But the other thing I'm sort of noticing as well and hearing from the different conferences and things that I attend is that actually attackers are starting to take more time. So they're not necessarily in it for the quick win anymore. They're happy to be more patient, you know, find a good target, do their reconnaissance, get in there, and then inflict kind of massive damage that way. So yeah, there's kind of two shifts happening there. And then also, as I think Peter alluded to it as well, you know, New Zealand's not alone in this. Like other countries get targeted for these types of attacks as well. But countries like America, they have had so much of this that they have shored up their defences, and they're just in a more mature state. So that's where kind of New Zealand is potentially on the back foot as well. And you can see why ransom or cyber attackers would want to come into the New Zealand market, because it is fresher, that we're not so used to it. It's, you know, that kind of thing.
Yep. Hey, Michael, did you want to say anything about what's evolving? There is a specific question here about, is CERT seeing a decrease in volumetric DDoS attacks and more application level denial of service attacks? What's the trends? Do you have anything you'd like to say on that one?
Unfortunately, I don't have any specific stats on volumetric versus application level DDoS attacks. Yeah, I just don't have that information at hand. Definitely, you know, as we look at the way things have been evolving over the last few years, and I guess particularly this year, you know, definitely the crime groups are increasingly sophisticated and sort of specializing. You know, as has been alluded to, we're really seeing partner groups and a lot of cooperation or selling of access between groups. So they are developing better and better tooling for doing their part of the crime, and then, you know, selling off access to an existing network, or selling off a new piece of malware, and that's really a business for them. So they're actually, you know, continually developing that product. They're you know, providing support to their customers. You know, they've got actual customer support websites and everything. And so, you know, the amount of work they're putting in is, you know, there's a lot of work, and you know, it's all about how do they get paid. You know, we see a lot of business email compromise, which is, you know, it starts off with a really simple, just sending phishing emails and getting, you know, people's usernames and passwords, but that, you know, can then lead to someone being in your mailbox, sending fake invoices and actually capturing the responses to those, so that you think you're paying a bill to your supplier, but actually you're paying it into someone else's bank account. And yeah, a DDoS is such an old, unsophisticated technique, but they're doing it because it'll get them paid. And so the evolution is really they keep looking for pain points. How can they put someone in a position where you would be tempted to pay them to make them go away? So that's why ransomware has evolved. That ransomware first popped up on our radar a good 10 years ago, and here we are. It's still going, it's still evolving. They're still making new ransomware and getting better and better at how to maximize the effect on target so that you're more likely to pay. Again, we recommend that you don't pay and instead contact us.
Right, well that's good, because that's sort of the next question, which is, if a company receives a ransom request or is experiencing an attack of some type, how do they go about reporting it in, and whom to? Who wants to start with that? Did you want to start with that, Michael, again? Because you did say, talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on our website, cert.gov.nz, we have a reporting tool that basically you can it's a, choose your own adventure kind of thing that basically will hopefully help you, even if you don't know exactly what the incident that you're facing is. It will hopefully get you to the right sort of conclusion of what it is. Send that report to us, and then we can work with you over the phone, over email, to really work through, okay, what is the thing that's going on, and how do you recover from that? And so we have a team of incident responders here to help you work through that, and then also giving advice about how do you stop that from happening again in future, because obviously prevention is a lot easier than fixing something that's already gone wrong. We don't do hands-on keyboard work, so that's where the environment of information security companies out there, if you need hands-on keyboard work, you would need to engage someone else.
Yeah, we might ask Hillary this question now, because they are a provider. If a company gets a ransom request or the attack, what do you recommend to them?
Sure. So, well, that's the thing. First of all, I think you want to try and avoid being in this kind of position. So there is a lot of good practice security things that you can put in place first. For example, ransoms can happen a lot of different ways. So you want to make sure that you've got your staff trained to recognize things like phishing emails, and have good cybersecurity behaviors, because sometimes they can target people in an organization as well. It's also a really good idea to have visibility of your network. So, and the reason why that's so critical is because if you know what's happening when it's happening, you can respond faster. So in the case of ransomware, that means detecting it quickly before it spreads too much. So having a really good incident response plan is really key. And so if we're talking about, these kind of two key ones at the moment, ransomware and DDoS, well, maybe it's a really good time to do a, desktop simulation of that, so that should it happen to your organization, you know what you're going to do. But in relation to, preparing and mitigating the damage and risks of DDoS attacks in particular, then in that case, it's quite good to do things like making sure you've petitioned your critical online services, so your mail services, for example, from your other online services, like your web hosting services. So that can really help kind of, not have those single points of failure. Also can be useful to have a static version of your website as a kind of disaster recovery mitigation that you can put in place. So a static version of your website, one that requires minimal processing and bandwidth, to just kind of have that continuity of services as well. You may look at, often your things that are on-prem can be more at risk as well compared to cloud. So you might want to look at using, if you're not already, some cloud hosting companies. So in particular, if you are going with those bigger cloud providers, so Microsoft, Azure, you know, they have a lot of mitigations in place for DDoS to help you, and they can handle more of those kind of big attacks. So often that's a really good place to, you know, good services to consume. There are sort of DDoS mitigation services that you can procure as well. So that's always an option. Particularly the scrubbing, which is sort of separating out the bad traffic from the good traffic, that can be quite expensive though. So it might be something you have to weigh up along with your other security risks that you've got on your list as well. But yeah, there's lots of things you can do in that space. I want to leave some for Philip to mention as well.
Yeah. Can I throw this one to Philip? Just following on from what Hilary talked about, the cloud versus on-prem, because there's a couple of questions in here that are a bit spread through, which said, are we at risk more if we've got stuff on-prem, or are we at risk if we've got more stuff more on cloud? Where do we go?
It's a tough question. And let me explain to why it's a tough question. But if you have your key systems in with, say, Microsoft, or AWS, Amazon, they're going to have far better defenses than what us as individuals, particularly small organizations, can put in place, specialized teams. So, you know, they are probably good at stopping things. The problem I have with that is a couple of clients I worked with during, I guess, the peak of these DDoS attacks, a couple of weeks ago now, is because one of Spark's customers was being attacked, and it could be someone else. What was happening is Spark's pipeline of internet out the country was getting overwhelmed, and the couple of organizations I was dealing with were losing connectivities to some of their key cloud systems. Now, that wasn't a common experience, but that was knocking out their telephony systems, that was knocking out international traffic to their website, so they weren't even being targeted. So there's always an aspect about what happens with a cloud system, if it's offshore particularly. What happens if we lose internet connectivity? It could be as simple as someone digging up the roadside and cutting through the fiber. So there is a risk there as well. I don't think it's a particularly risk to worry a lot about, but certainly should come into consideration. So it does depend. Most organizations I see that have got life critical systems, they're still on premise where they can control it, or certainly domestic. Now, I think the story will change potentially, or those things that worry people sometimes and often unnecessarily might change. That now we're seeing the big cloud providers starting to come to New Zealand. So Microsoft announced that they're setting up a data center here. So, you know, there's some greater level of control, or maybe some greater level of trust, because we can see a big building. So it's not an easy answer, and it depends on the nature of individual systems. But I would say certainly for smaller organizations, you probably can get far better security with cloud systems. Now, that's not saying that cloud is secure inherently. You know, cloud, if I pick Office 365 that a lot of organizations use, it's highly configurable. You can configure it and the security can be quite poor, or you can configure it given the options that you've provided and make it really quite secure. So you can't just, you know, pass responsibility over and assume that the cloud provider is going to do a great job and you don't need to think about it. It's certainly going to make your life easier.
Yeah, can we just we'll change tack a little bit. We'll stick with you, Philip, just for the moment. Do you think New Zealand organisations are good at sharing their learnings from cyber attacks, or is there a stigma attached to reputation, hence they won't talk about the experience? I'm going to ask all three of you, but we're going to start with Philip.
I don't think we are good at sharing it. And look, there isn't a competitive advantage about being more secure than some other organisation. I think we should be sharing it more. Some industries are doing that. If I look at the banking sector, you know, the security teams of the banks are getting together and saying, hey, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we're doing about it. Because if one bank's experiencing it now, then another will as well later. We see that in some of the infrastructure sector, say around electricity, where again, there are groups who are sharing this information in a coordinated approach. I don't think there is any problem doing it. You know, getting together maybe with like businesses or with organizations, you know, that you can trust, and talking about your experiences, talking about how you're tackling things. Because in New Zealand, our security teams are tiny. You know, often this is zero, it's part of someone's role, or the team might be one or two. You know, there aren't a lot of large teams in industry. So who do you talk to? And talking to your peers and colleagues and people that are familiar with your type of business or just in general, it's got to be helpful. I don't think there is any embarrassment or anything to be worried about it. You know, attacks occur, things happen. You know, I don't think anybody looks down on any organisations that have been targeted and hit over the last few weeks. They just happen to be the ones that popped up in the press or happen to be the ones that are slightly more visible. It's something we should be doing far more often.
Hilary, what's your thoughts on that? Because you've worked overseas as well.
Yes. And look, I think it sort of depends on what industry you're in. I think generally, if I was answering that question, I'd say probably not good at sharing. But for example, there are, you know, government trust groups. And so within that kind of sphere, quite a bit is shared in terms of good practice and security and IT and things like that. Audia's telecommunications company as well. So we have a, you know, telecommunications trust group as well. So there is some good sharing and coordination that goes on there, but generally, probably not. And it's going to depend on what business the company's in as well. So, you know, if you're a financial institution, if you're a technology company, you know, that kind of thing, there is brand and reputational damage from being hit by a cyber attack. That said, I think the public will be generally forgiving if it happens once. If it starts happening more than once, then that's when, you know, goodwill is lost and customers start leaving. So there's a lot wound up in security, which is probably why we don't share as much. But then, you know, we do have this sharing is caring piece. You know, if I've been attacked by something, then chances are other people could be, and we should be sharing more of this information. But yeah, there is that brand and reputation thing as well. So, which is probably why people don't.
And Michael, you got any thoughts on that?
I think Philip and Hilary have really hit it on the head that I'd agree that there isn't, I think, a lot of sharing of incidents in New Zealand, and that's really unfortunate. I think that actually sharing that and saying, hey, look, I was affected by this, and having those conversations, because I think a lot of companies would be surprised at how many other people have been in the same situation, have had that same problem, have been hit by a similar type of incident. And so you can learn from each other about how to recover from it better, but also, you know, how to prevent that from happening. So, you know, sharing of information doesn't necessarily mean, hey, look, we're really bad, we screwed up. That's not it at all. You know, so many companies will be affected by a security incident, and being able to learn from each other, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do as a community to really lift all of New Zealand cybersecurity.
Cool. Hilary, I want to come back to you. Philip talked about security teams being small, and there's a question here about how easy is it to build and retain a good security team given that shortage, and what alternate approaches can you take?
Yeah, it is really tricky. Security skills are in hot demand in the market. In fact, what we're seeing through lockdown and the ransomware and the DDoS events is that, you know, our customers are actually building more security teams now than they ever have before. Also, that whole cloud skill set is really hot and in demand. So yeah, so there's almost not enough of those security skills to go around. I think what organisations are doing, and what we sort of tend to do as well, is in that case we tend to build the skills internally. So we'll favour sort of internal promotions into our security team over external ones quite often, and then we'll invest in those people and build up the skill set that way. It just seems like that's sort of the most successful way that you can recruit kind of good security people in these days.
Okay. So let's, in the last 10 minutes or so, turn our thoughts to, you know, what you can do to be a bit more proactive. And I'm going to start with Philip, because this is the most highest voted question. You commented that the average New Zealand cyber maturity was about 1.9. What level of maturity would you typically like to see New Zealand businesses at? 2.5, assuming this is a maturity scale of 5.
Look, it depends on your organisation and the risk you're facing and that. But, you know, a 3, where you've got some standard processes, might be a good target to aim for. But, you know, It depends where you should be. There's a number of dimensions to maturity. You know, how good are you at security risk management? And most organizations, it's probably well below 1. And that's a critical thing we forget about. We tend to focus on the technology, the toys, the IT infrastructure, the stuff that we're used to, not necessarily the governance layer or the security risk management or the ability to respond to incidents or the third parties that have access to our information. They all tend to be low. So it depends where you want to be in the different domains, depends upon the nature of your organization, who you work with. But you know, if I was to pick a number, 3 is a good place to start. Some places might want to be 3 in this domain and 4 in that domain. If the answer is 5, then you're probably spending too much money and not getting probably the outcomes you need. And maturity doesn't necessarily link directly to risk, but it is a good analogy for it. You know, you can have low maturity and have a good level of risk management. Probably unlikely, but that possibility exists. You can also be the other way. You know, you can have a good level of maturity and probably still missing some of your key risks. So, but it does balance off. You know, if you wanted to target, when we're talking to organizations, because they are down at 1.9, 1.5, 2, wherever they may be, they're saying, okay, we want this, let's start aim for a 3 and go from there. Because to go from, you know, a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to 4, it's not that straightforward. Certainly when we were working across government after some of the large attacks 7, 8, 9 years ago and measuring maturity across government agencies, you know, someone said, okay, we're a 2 in this area now, we want to be a 4, we can do it. In hindsight, as that got measured over the years, reality with, you know, funding and focus and people, they were probably increasing by, you know, a level of 1 in a year. And that's assuming you got the focus. So you also want to be realistic about where you get, here's a goal, here's what we need to do, and reassess. Because it's not a tick the box exercise, it's not simple. And increasing your maturity, it's also not saying one size fits all. How one organization might deal with getting mature in a particular area might be dramatically different to how another organization. There might be something you can scale right down for a small business, but you might be a much larger complex business, you might need a different thing that's scaled up to be the same level of maturity. So that's not a particularly clear answer, but I think it's understanding where you are now, setting a realistic goal and working out what are those steps, tactical steps we need you to get there, reevaluating and keep going.
So I think you've also given a bit of an answer to the next question I'm going to ask, which I think instead of going to you, Philip, we'll start with Hilary, and that's, if you sat on a company board or in senior management, what would you recommend are the steps to getting confidence over the robustness of your cybersecurity measures?
That's a really good question. First of all, I think if it isn't already there, I think there needs to be kind of an education at that board level about what good cybersecurity governance sort of best practice is. And there can be various ways you do that. And then that kind of helps you form what to ask as a director. So, you know, there's things like making sure that you take a holistic approach to cybersecurity. So looking at that you've got the right governance in place and risk management and policies and things like that. And, you know, if making sure those things actually are in place and effective. Then there's also, you want to make sure you're having a bit of a, what's the health check, if you like, of cybersecurity in an organisation. So often boards will find that out through some key metrics that are supplied through the organisation as well, because that gives the directors things to ask questions about. They can go, oh, you know, why is our cybersecurity training not like 98% complete by the people in our organisation? You know, that says something about the culture of the organisation. Or they can say, you know, why aren't we getting more, you know, alerts to fish alert through our staff? Because that's a really good indicator of cybersecurity culture as well. They also want to be looking at the top security risks for the organisation as well, and making sure they're doing that deep dive into cybersecurity as well, so that they, you know, have that front of mind in terms of how it's performing, and have more time than they would just with the normal kind of information report to discuss cybersecurity. But it can be difficult for board members as well, because it's security, it's sort of, you know, it's IT, it's technology stuff, and they might not be as comfortable in that space as well. But we need to make all the employees really comfortable talking about security, knowing what good practice is, and same with technology as well. We need to make that language way more friendly as well, so that it's, you know, just what every single employee or board of director is aware of.
Okay. And just following on from that, I don't know who to throw this one to. Any of you three could answer. It's about cyber security insurance. There's a few questions about that. You know, what's the value? Should we have it? There are offerings, etc. So since you're unmuted, Hilary, do you want to start?
Thanks. It's probably the question I can't answer, actually.
Oh, okay.
You know, I think with insurance, every business needs to weigh up the value of it for them. You know, business disruption insurance and things like that definitely have a place. In terms of cyber insurance, I don't know, is that more of a Philip question?
Probably.
Potentially?
Right.
I have a go at it because it's a very common question. And there is no yes or no answer, but it needs to be considered like other insurers. I would say though, it's never been cheaper than it is right now. The insurance companies are wanting to sell to us, so they're actually giving us a good deal. And you'll never get, the insurance companies are paying out. And I've seen some fairly large payouts. So that's got to be beneficial. But also, you know, if you haven't got a team to help respond to security incidents, that's one of the biggest benefits you get. So, for example, we work with one of the large insurers, and when you phone them up, they phone us up and get us out there to help you out. That's definitely an advantage. I'd say on the other hand, though, there's some things you can't insure against. You can't insure against reputation. You know, you can't insure against someone having stolen your information. Well, if you lose it, you have. They've taken copies of it. Well, that insurance didn't help. So it's certainly a consideration. You know, again, it's about risk management. You've got a risk. You know, how do you respond to that risk? You know, you can mitigate it, so you know, reduce it down or eliminate it. You can live with it, and that can be valid, or you can transfer, which is the insurance component. It is relatively inexpensive. Some industries, though, insurers struggle to deal with, well, how do we quantify what that big is? I think at the moment, though, you'll get to the point where the insurance companies go, actually, we're sick of paying for this. Or actually, you had really bad security in place. No, we didn't ask those questions, but you had really bad security in place. We're not going to pay out on it. So a bit like health insurance. You didn't tell us that you had, you know, an existing condition. It's your fault. At the moment, that's not happening. So, you know, while we might sort of get it now, and maybe it's a good answer, maybe it's not. It's not something you should rely upon. It is the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
Okay. Michael, I'm going to ask you a bit more of a technical threat question that's here, because I think you can answer it. How do organizations become targets of DDoS and other attacks? Are they systematically found and targeted like port scans, or is it more about their profile?
I can't really speak about specific incidents, but
no, I didn't think so.
I would say that the vast majority of what we see is not targeted. It is a case of you know, the crime groups are basically just going out across the whole internet, trying password spraying or trying to find a particular vulnerability and exploit that, and basically just getting as many things as they can with that particular attack, and then often they'll either you know, make use of that, you know, be it part of a botnet to then do further attacks, or perhaps sell that on to another group who's going to you know, to deploy the ransomware or whatever that group is going to do. So yeah, I don't think that it's really how you become a target, but I think the important thing is the defensive measures don't really change. So whether you've been targeted or whether it's a general state of the internet thing, for organizations, we've got our 10 critical controls, which we review every year based on the incidents that have been reported to us. This is a product that's near and dear to my heart. I work pretty hard on fighting the fight of what goes into that list. And so, you know, Hilary's mentioned network segmentation. That's one of our critical controls. And, you know, that's really one of the critical ones that I think would mitigate a lot of incidents along with the other 9.
Yep, cool. Hey, look, we've only got a few minutes left, so what I'm going to do is wrap it up by asking each of the panelists to give a minute or two just about, having been through this conversation, what are the 2 or 3 really important things that you really want to get across to the people who have dialed into this session, that perhaps you haven't had a chance to get over, or maybe you just want to reiterate. So if we start with Hilary, what would be those few things you'd want to get across?
Yeah, cool, thank you. So I've probably got 3 quick ones. The first is what I said at the start around all cyber attacks and security events are important, DDoS being just one of those. So don't lose sight of all of your other security risks in your company. Make decisions in terms of your risk posture. The second one is it is so useful to have visibility of your network and know what's going on so that if something happens, you spot it and you can react quickly. Time is definitely of the essence in cyber attack world. And then lastly, it is just so important that businesses take online security really seriously and work to ensure staff are prepared and aware of all the risks. You often think you won't be the subject of attack, but the reality is there's nothing to stop it from happening. And in my experience, it is more than just awareness. You need to think about the behaviour of your staff and building a really strong security culture in your company as well.
And Michael, from your perspective at CERT?
Yeah, I think it is important that everyone takes cybersecurity seriously. So yeah, I'm going to plug our critical controls again. They are really the things that, from a technical perspective, that's really what we want to see people doing. And when it comes to preparing, also know who your escalation points are internally and externally. So if something does happen, you're not running around trying to work out who to call. You've got someone, whether that's going to be your internal security team or you're calling up an external agency, whether that's us or another security company. But yes, prepare ahead of time and your life is going to be a lot better if you do have that really, really bad day.
Cool. And the concluding comments go to you, Philip.
Look, it's a very similar comment. It is about prepare. We talk about risk management. That's not something that IT people have traditionally done and don't necessarily now know how to do it or are uncomfortable. And the people, the non-IT people do is try and get those two lots talking together. Because it's about understanding, what is your critical systems information? What are the threats to it? What mitigations do we have to therefore put in place? We've all got limited resources, limited time, limited money. So it's about focusing on those risks. And certainly from a distributed denial of service context, preparation is key. What are your business critical systems? How do we protect those? Do we put a mitigation provider? So some sort of filter in front of those. Do we separate our online systems on different infrastructure to our critical business systems? It's about, and Hilary's mentioned quite a few of these, do we make sure we're having an instant response process? So when, and does consider distributed denial of service attacks. So when something does happen, you're more prepared. You've got some structure about how you're going through those. Risk management, preparation, I think is the best thing you can do. It's not just about having technical solutions, but those are some of the mitigations, some of the risks you may have. Thank you.
Hey, well, thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for being part of our event this afternoon, particularly to Hilary and Michael and Philip for stepping up at, what was pretty well a very quickly put together briefing. And so I really appreciate that. Certainly our partnership with KPMG is always it was good to work with them. And so 2 things, we've made a recording of this. It will be on our YouTube channel, our 2Ns YouTube channel, but the link will be available, and Philip through KPMG, and anyone else will be able to share that. We'll put it public. And I do need to apologise that the quality of the catering and the networking drinks really aren't up to scratch. But I think we're pretty much getting used to these things are easy to get to, but we miss out on those things. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Philip, Hilary, and Michael for being here tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.